You, my friend, are in for a treat of treats with this episode of the EntreMD podcast. I have a very special guest, Dr. Carolina Sueldo. She's a double board certified physician in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. She has a boutique fertility practice that she set up, and she walks through her journey from before she started the practice to her first year to where she is now. She is a total boss, alumni of the EntreMD Business School. I remember when I first met her, she says, "I'm going to be one of your best students." And oh my goodness, what she has done has been unbelievable. And what makes this even more magical is that this interview was run by my daughter, Cheta, who is 17 years old. She has her own podcast. It's called the Profitable Private Practice Podcast, where she interviews doctors in private practice, tracking their journey, because she's a physician ally too. This is a family business, people. Okay. So she interviews Dr. Sueldo in this fantastic interview. So excited to share it with you. So if you haven't subscribed to the Profitable Private Practice Podcast yet, I want to invite you to do that. And I want you to follow Dr. Sueldo. If this interview is such a gift to you, I want you to share this episode. This is going to change your life, whether you're a private practice or not, whether you're a cash payer or not. I want you to learn the gems from this and change your own world. And now for the episode.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Profitable Private Practice Podcast. And today I have with me Dr. Carolina Sueldo. Hi, Dr. Sueldo.
Hi, Cheta. Thank you so much for having me on.
Just so that we can get started, could you please give us a 60-second introduction of yourself?
Oh, man, I don't think I've ever timed myself. Okay, so I am Dr. Carolina Sueldo. I'm a double board certified fertility specialist, and I'm also the founder of Ceibo Fertility Center, a boutique fertility practice in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
I heard a few things. One, that you were born in Carolina and then you moved to Argentina, and that you're a very avid soccer fan. So I was doing some research and I found like a post from like 107 weeks ago, and it was, I think of like your son, and he had a Messi jersey on, and you were just talking about it. So could you tell us a little bit about, your love for soccer, how you were born in California, moved to Argentina? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
My parents are originally from Argentina, just outside of the capital, outside of Buenos Aires. And in the early 70s, they emigrated to the US. They started first in Chicago and then ended up in California. That's where my brothers and I were born and raised, but we were very connected to Argentina, even like before I can remember. So we were traveling back once or twice a year for extended periods of time. And then when I was 15, the family actually packed up and moved down there. So I actually did high school and I stayed down there for medical school and then came back for my post-grad training. So I did residency in California, my REI infertility fellowship in Connecticut, and then I've now been in practice for a little over 10 years.
I love that. That is amazing.
It's a bicultural upbringing, very much from the very beginning. But one thing that's from the very beginning exploded was love for soccer. So my dad actually played club soccer in Argentina in the under 18s and, had us in soccer all through our childhood for as long as I can remember anyway. We actually had jerseys, my husband and I, for our dogs. And then once the kids came along, we got them their own.
So in essence, you have pretty deep roots in Argentina, yes.
And in fact, Ceibo is the national flower of Argentina. So the name of my clinic is tied to that background, yeah.
You mentioned that you moved back when you were 15. Did that affect anything lifestyle-wise?
It definitely shaped who I was as a person. Anyone who can, I encourage them to live abroad during their sort of formative years. Living abroad it completely changes your view of the world. It, for me, really shaped, my extroverted personality, how I am in social circles. Starting high school at the age of 15 in a new country, in a new language, in a new culture was a whole, because even though you visit, it's one thing to visit family and be in sort of a family home environment. It's very different to actually live there and go to school there, do sports there, etc.
Let's go ahead and, get started on the entrepreneurial side of things. So could you tell us about the first moment when you entertained the thought of becoming an entrepreneur?
I actually never had plans to open my own practice. That was never in the cards. But when my husband and I made the decision to move back to South Florida, this was sometime in 2022. I had first practiced here right out of fellowship, so I knew most of the players. I didn't know all of the practices, but I knew many of the players. And in the fertility space specifically, private equity firms have actually acquired the large portion of the market share. So most of the big practices in the area are backed by or majority owned by private equity firms. Really, at the outset, there was like, which of these is the least bad for me? I had already lived the private equity experience and really was just didn't fit well with it. My personality, how I wanted to practice. There was just so many things that were fundamentally misaligned. And so really, my husband was the one who first planted the seed of like, if you're going to go into something already knowing that you're going to be unhappy, you should just like do your own thing, shoot your shot, see what happens. And if you can make it work, great. And if you can't, you can just join one of them later.
So he kind of just pushed you to start your own practice.
Exactly. And you don't know what you don't know. Like I had 2 small children at the time when we were contemplating this. My older son was 3. My younger guy was, just barely a year when we were starting to navigate this. It was a really big decision for me as a mom to young children to make this leap. But it really came down to, I was on the verge of 40. I knew I had still many years left to practice, and I knew I loved what I was doing and could create a lot of impact, but I did not love the business of medicine and sort of my options that were on the table at that time. And so it really was kind of that leap of faith, like, hey, let's do it, and we're going to shoot our shot, and let's see what we can do with this.
What were some mindset shifts, in essence, that you had to make before starting your practice?
I think the first thing was I needed to believe that it was possible. I needed to find examples. And there was somebody in California who was already doing it, had been doing it. Now, the conditions and circumstances were a little bit different than what I was walking into, but they were a great support and mentor in the beginning. So finding examples that it was possible, and then finding community, right? Like surrounding myself with both the people and the tools that I was going to need. Because again, I said it earlier, you don't know what you don't know. And so what were the tools that I was going to need to make that happen? We talk a lot about marketing strategy, knowing your numbers, etc. But even basic things of like joining the local medical society, finding the office space, where was I going to get my supplies from, exam tables, how was I going to furnish, like all of those things, I didn't know what I didn't know. And then it was really being okay with the discomfort. I think that was probably the biggest mindset shift. In medicine, there's very much kind of this train that you are on, right? Medical school, then post-grad training, whether it's residency or residency and fellowship. And then you join either a hospital or a group and you're on that track, and you may or may not be up for partnership. And it's very sort of defined, if you will. And what I was doing, certainly in the fertility space, it was very rare to see people doing that. And here in South Florida, people thought I was crazy. Like they were like, you're doing what? Like that's never going to work. I literally had somebody call me and tell me, they were just waiting for me to fail so that they could absorb myself and my patients. It was definitely going against the grain and having to be okay with that and like knowing that it was possible.
And so you mentioned a few times that you don't know what you don't know. So when going into practices, I've interviewed some people who were like, well, I didn't really know anything about it. So I joined the business school. And then after I joined the business school, I started my practice. So did you like wait until you had majority of the information before you started your practice, or you kind of just went straight in?
There's the saying, build the plane while you're flying. That is very much me with Ceibo. Because I can take really good care of patients, right? Like patient care is my zone of genius. The business side, whole different ballgame. And so you have to learn and you grow with your business. So at the time that I found EntreMD and Dr. Una, I knew that we were coming back to Florida, but I didn't know what that looked like. So really, I stumbled upon it more from like a brand building, reputation building type of approach. And then as I think I had just joined the business school. It was kind of around the time where I made the decision I was going to open my own practice. And so I knew I was going to need that. And so it was the business school, it was the community. And then locally on the ground, I actually leaned heavily on the local society, the medical society, and then, just colleagues in the area like, hey, I'm looking for XYZ. What's your suggestion? But those were kind of the different tools. I didn't have any information actually when I was starting out.
So what are some surprising opportunities that entrepreneurship has opened up for you?
So I think that there's a few things that you really don't think about. One of them, I think, is the work-life balance. And so one message that I received a lot of was, you're going to be in solo practice, you're going to be on call 24/7, it's going to be miserable, 365 days a week. But having control over my schedule, autonomy over my schedule, and control over the patient experience Actually, my patients were getting so much communication from myself and my team that I rarely got called. I can count on one hand the number of times that I've been called in the middle of the night or called on a weekend or whatnot unexpectedly. So I think the work-life balance was actually much better than what I was expecting going into it. The second opportunity was the local networking with other female physician founders. That really was unexpected, and just getting to see what other people are doing, I would say both here on the ground and in the business school, and just getting the opportunity to network with other female founders who are doing like really rock star things. And there's some rock star guys in the business school too. Seeing those examples and having those vision boards, again, both here on the ground and in the business school across the country, that was really unexpected. And what you find is that there's actually people that are rocking it in medicine. Like, it's not this sort of negative gray picture that everybody paints. And then the third, it's this kind of bucket of like consulting, speaking, device, like this sort of world that opened up. People that are interested from other industries are interested in both learning from you and hearing your expertise from a medical standpoint on different things. So that's been cool.
I absolutely love that for you. And that I do believe that entrepreneurship does open up, a lot of opportunities in the way where you were saying that you can count on your hand how many times you've been called in the middle of the night. I feel like I can do the same thing for my mom, where like the way she has her work-life balance. So even when she gets calls, they're fast paced. It's, never that big of a deal. But then she hardly ever gets them because I believe that she has trained her patients in a way where if you need this, then you go here rather than calling me to do this. So she has absolutely mastered that. And I love that for both you and her. And so one of the wins that you mentioned in the little questionnaire was that you were named the best doctor in Fort Lauderdale in 2024 and in 2025. So could you expand on that for us a little bit?
There is a concept that Dr. Una talks about a lot, which is sort of establishing yourself as an authority in your space. And when I moved to Fort Lauderdale, I had been away from the South Florida region. I was never in Fort Lauderdale, so I was brand new to the area, but I'd been away from the South Florida region for 5 years. So nobody really knew who I was. And there was a lot of reputation and brand building that has gone into the last couple of years for me. And apparently there's a local magazine. It's called the Fort Lauderdale Magazine. Readers can vote to see who is the best doctor in the area. And in 2024, I got an email, which I thought was spam at the time. And they're like, hey, you won. And now, mind you, at this point, we had been open less than a year. Okay. So we had been open less than a year. And I get this email, you won Best Doctor of Fort Lauderdale. I'm like, what is this? Whatnot? And I was getting texts from my kids' school, from the parents and whatnot, like, oh my gosh, you're in the magazine. And I was like, what is happening right now? And it speaks to two things, right? It speaks to number one, the gap, right? And sort of what patients were wanting and what patients were seeking, and the kind of service and the kind of care that we were giving to our fertility patients. And number two is that I would have never thought that the Fort Lauderdale magazine was of significance, if you will, for my brand building. And yet it was so important and allowed for so many things. And then that led to other things, right? Because then that's something that's going on your social media. That's something that's going on your pitches when you're pitching for podcasts or pitching for interviews, etc. It adds a layer of like street cred that is maybe outside of the orthodox, what we think of as street cred, which is, certifications and titles and whatnot. Like, nobody cares that I'm double board certified. Nobody cares about my maintenance of certification. Nobody cares. I care, but really they're looking to this type of recognition. It was pretty cool. I mean, year one of business, we got it. Year two of business, we got it. We're now at the end of March, but we're hoping for a three-peat 3 years in a row. So we'll see how that goes.
That sounds amazing. Now, you did mention at the beginning that something that Dr. Una talks about is making yourself an authority in that place. So could you talk a little bit about how you were able to do that?
I think one of the things that I focused on very early on was getting out in my community. So there's a local medical society that I joined, and to be a member, you have to give a 5-minute talk, and there's all different specialties, right? And so that's a way for other providers in the area to get to know me. I also joined a few different women's groups, volunteering and women's networking. We then found events where I could speak at locally. And so it was really about getting myself out in the community. And then once you're out there, you can share your your credentials, you can share the letters behind your name, etc. That visibility is huge.
So it's essentially when it came to starting out your practice, you didn't hold back with the visibility thing.
Yeah, I went full court press. There's nothing like your face out there in the community. Yeah, for sure.
And you did talk a little bit about brand building. So could you mention some of the things that you were able to do? Because I know your social media is definitely on fire. I've seen you like all over my feed. So could you talk a little bit about what it is that you do for that?
We started with a personal account, Dr. Carolina Sueldo, and I still, have that. But Ceibo was always meant to be bigger than me. Ceibo was always meant to go beyond one doctor. And so we created the Ceibo Fertility Center Facebook and Instagram page, which are linked together. So it's one post feeding into two venues, and really just being consistent with the content and publishing regularly. I have a virtual assistant who's phenomenal. She's been with me since the very first days of just building my own personal brand. And she knows me and my voice so well that she's really able to curate that content. So we have a strong, consistent presence on social media. Our website is also really incredible. You don't want to spend a ton of time on it. If you can, you want to outsource it, but it is definitely a representation of your brand. And I've gotten many comments on the ease of navigation, the aesthetic, the information. So that's been really important as well for that digital footprint.
And so in getting to this point where you are now, where you've gotten the best doctor at Fort Lauderdale 2 years in a row, etc., what were some of the challenges that you had to face in getting to where you are now?
Where do I start? We could do a whole podcast episode on that. If I could encapsulate it, I would say the biggest thing is learning resilience. Anyone who's a doctor is resilient. You've had to go through years and years of training and exams and all kinds of stressors, critical cases, etc. I mentioned in the beginning, like, patient care is your zone of genius. I was a beginner when it came to the business of medicine. And there were a lot of things that happened in the beginning, from a landlord that was really difficult to work with, a difficult patient that ended up with a financial impact to the practice, a vendor not delivering on time, and then that directly impacted patient care, to, personnel and staffing situations and having to let somebody go within their 90-day probationary period, etc. There's been so many things that have happened in this short amount of time. And I think the biggest shift has been my bounce back. In the beginning, I would not sleep. I would really struggle through it. I leaned very, very heavily on the EBS community in that first year. I don't know that there would be a Ceibo without EBS. In fact, I say that all the time to Dr. Eden. I always tell her there's no EBS without EntreMD. As time has passed, the challenges are still there in a different way, and my ability to respond to them has also evolved. And so that's been really nice. Like that valley, that negativity, it doesn't last forever.
And so you mentioned that without EBS, there is no Ceibo. So could you talk a little bit about, the business school? What did the business school contribute to the success of your private practice?
Probably the biggest thing is having the community. Being a, solo founder in any industry, but especially in medicine today, is extremely lonely, extremely isolating. In my particular case, add that I was a new mother to young children, aging parents, the sandwich generation. That first year was brutal. And the only way that I got through that was having the support in the community of the EntreMD Business School. 100%. There's no doubt. Beyond that, I think it's the frameworks. So the systems that come from, okay, I know I need to brand build. What does that actually mean? So I need to have a social media. I need to have a website. I need to pitch for podcasts. What is the actual sequence to doing that? What's the frequency? Dr. Una talks about the revenue generation framework. That's like literally ingrained in my brain, and I'm still using that now. The other thing that's been interesting now, which I didn't think about it at the time, but now in year 3, is building for growth and building for sort of that, starting at the foundation, but building for a business, 2 or 3 iterations from where you're at today makes all the difference. And so running meetings, how the staff operates, the SOPs, the ROI for each employee, et cetera, like all of that is the thinking is, okay, Ceibo 5 years from now, Ceibo 10 years from now, what is that looking like? That mindset was really helpful. And then I would say, back to the loneliness and isolation, you don't really have a lot of spaces where you can go and share and be vulnerable with the hard parts of doing this. And so having the business school as a safe container to navigate not only the wins, which are what we typically share with everyone, but also the valleys and the hard parts of doing this. That was critical.
So speaking of wins, can we talk a little bit about them? Let's do your top 3 wins. We can do both tangible and intangible.
Tangible wins, I would say from a revenue standpoint. So I self-funded the business. I did not take out a loan. Started very lean and kind of grew into it. That's not right or wrong. That's just how I chose to do it. By the end of year 1, I had paid myself back startup costs and had paid myself a 6-figure salary. And then going into year 2, it was a stretch goal, but we wanted to double our revenue. And we actually hit that by the end of December 2025. So year 2 of business.
What was the revenue goal you had for that?
My revenue goal was $1 million.
And so you hit that. That's amazing.
We did. Before December 31st, we broke that number, which was incredible.
Wow.
It was a very big stretch for us starting the year. So we were very excited about it. I think the second win is really from a positioning standpoint. I mentioned being a member of the local medical society. I'm a co-founder for a local female physician founders group in South Florida, and I help co-run that based on my EBS experience. I'm also a member for the Latin American Reproductive Medicine Association, which was also on my vision board for 2 years in a row, 2023, 2024, and that finally came into effect. And I think the third is a little bit more intangible, but living with intention and setting those annual goals in the 9 areas of life. That's something that we practice in EBS. I had heard of this, but never had done it in any sort of intentional way. And it's something that I've carried with me. Did recently with my team for their own personal development. And then we did a collective one for the business. Getting to the end of the year and seeing 75 to 80% of those goals met is pretty cool. I think those would be my top 2 or 3 wins from EBS for sure.
Those are amazing wins. I'll take them. Now, a little bit earlier, you talked about your work-life balance. And something that I know Dr. Una talks a lot about is having your dream business and dream life. So could you talk a little bit about how you're experiencing both areas?
Yes, there's going to be seasons where you may have to put a little bit more into the business, a little bit less into the business. But generally speaking, I have a 4-day work week. I typically work 8 to 4, 8 to 5. I don't work weekends. I'm closed all major holidays. And my goal, which I hit last year, was to take 1 week off a quarter. This year, I'm trying to increase one of those to 2 weeks. So we're seeing if we can make that happen. More than anything, it's the autonomy of like, hey, my kid has a school show at 9:30 on a Thursday, so I can move things around and make that happen. So I think that work-life balance is definitely doable. It can look different for everyone. And I think one of the big takeaways from the business school was live a version of your dream life now. Like you may want to work X number of days, or you may want to take X amount of time off, or whatever the ultimate goal is. So what version of that can you live now? And that was really helpful as I'm still technically growing the business, right? We're still very much in growth mode. My word for 2026 is thoughtful scaling. How do I scale the business without compromising patient experience, without compromising team experience, and at the same time, like living a version of my dream life? I know what I want for my 5-year, my 10-year. How do I incorporate that, or pieces of that now?
The thoughtful scaling, could you talk a little bit more about it?
It really was born in my first year and a half of business. I probably had at least 4, if not more, investor groups reach out to me and like, we'll build your lab, we'll help you grow Ceibo, et cetera, et cetera. I had my business consultant come in, review, do an audit of all the business, the numbers, et cetera. And he had dollar signs in his eyes. Like we could have, 35 Ceibos across the country and like, let's blow this thing up and whatnot. But at its core, like my why was I wanted something different for myself and I wanted something different for the patients. In the beginning, it was really about carving out my little corner of the world to see my patients the way I wanted. And once we had proof of concept, we were like, oh, we can actually be a serious player in the space. Like, what does that look like, right? And so as we grow the business and as we think about scaling, because really the vision for Ceibo is not to be Fort Lauderdale, not to be a single practice. Like the thought is that Ceibo is a different model within the fertility space, offering boutique care. And we want to replicate that in other parts of the country. How do we scale and how do we grow the business in a way that won't compromise patient experience, what we've been able to deliver in the last couple of years, and also doesn't compromise the team, whether it's myself and my work-life balance or my team and their work-life balance and how they're able to function. So those are really like keeping those two at the forefront and the priority, but still with the intent of growing. The message that I have from my Ceibo experience is you can serve and give a lot of impact. You can give your team and yourself work-life balance, and you can still grow the business and be profitable. There is a way to do this without the model that's currently in the space, which is like high volume, working 1,000,000 hours, and that's the fastest way to get, to whatever your 10x multiple is.
If you could say something to a private practice owner, who's feeling a little bit challenged in the area of, okay, maybe they have too many work hours, or maybe patient care is their thing, but at the same time, they feel like they're not making enough. The patient care is kind of going down. What advice would you give to that person who's struggling with something like that?
So I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned along the way, in part thanks to the business school, and specifically the EBS math puzzle, is don't make it an emotional decision. Like remove the emotion out of it, remove the burnout, remove the fatigue, and think about like what is it that you're trying to achieve. If it's a revenue goal, if it's a patient number, if it's a, work hour number, et cetera, and then back into that result. So first identify what are you trying to achieve, and then retrofit your work to match that. I knew I wanted to hit 1,000,000 in revenue at the current rate that I was going, that even if I worked quote unquote more and went to 5 days a week instead of 4, I wasn't going to hit it. So how do I then back into that number? Whether it's increasing patient volume in the same amount of hours, whether it's increasing pricing, whether it's increasing my own hours, which I knew I didn't want to do. So I think it's about having the goal and then working backwards to solve for that solution.
You mentioned the business school just a little bit within that, the EBS math puzzle. And so what has been, your biggest takeaway from the business school, like the biggest lesson you learned while in it?
One is visibility. You have to be visible. Number 2 is systems, and being okay with those systems breaking with each new level that you kind of get to. The systems that got you here won't get you there. And then 3 is the strategy and like being clear on what you want, but removing the emotion from it and then backing into the decision.
Those are powerful. And then so if you could say something to someone who is on the fence about joining the business school, they're 1 foot in and 1 foot out, what would you tell them?
What I said earlier, there is no Ceibo without EBS. I wholeheartedly mean that. Having the community, having the space where people are rocking it and like really doing incredible things, and people that are going to support you, hear the good, the bad, and the ugly, all of that, makes it well worth it. And then you add sort of cherry on top is what you learn, because people are like, oh, well, I can get that from a book, or I can get that from, a podcast, or I can get that from whatever. But the community and the support and the like, hey, I need to pick your brain about this specific thing, that's very, very unique to EBS.
And so now to anybody who is listening and you believe that like you're a little bit on the fence about the business school, I would like to invite you to book a call. So in that, you'd have the opportunity to talk with one of our team members. You'd be able to lay out your concerns, talk about why you're on the fence. And what our team will do is that they will help you figure out your next best step. So if you're interested in booking a call, you can go to EntreMD.com/success. But like what Dr. Sueldo said, if you're looking for that type of community, because that community really isn't something that you can get from a podcast, and it's not something that you can get from a book, that community of where you have doctors who are uplifting you and, they're not trying to tear you down so that they can get on top. I really do believe that booking a call will really help, just so that you're able to talk to somebody about any questions that you may have. Because like my mother likes to say, Dr. Una, she says that EBS is here to serve you. And so that's what we're all about. We're all here to serve you, to help you with whatever it is that you may need. So that'll be EntreMD.com/success, so that you can book a call today. And now, Dr. Sueldo, I know you mentioned the community, and I feel like that may be your answer, but when you were in the business school, what was your favorite thing about it?
The live events were magic, and having the accountability of the Wednesday calls was great. The accountability is so important when you're navigating this, but the live events of EBS were magic. I still miss them.
I love the live events as well. And so, Dr. Sueldo, I just want to say Thank you so much. This has been a very awesome interview, and I've had a lot of fun and I've learned a lot of things. But now for our last question, where can people find you? They want to get to know more about you. Where should they go to look for you?
So I am on all the major social media platforms. The best thing to do would be to just send me a DM on my Instagram, Dr. Carolina Sueldo or Dr. Carolina Sueldo. If not, they can always submit a web inquiry on our website, CeiboFertilityCenter.com. Happy to help. If anybody has questions, always reach out and happy to help you navigate and answer.
I do have one more question now, actually. So if there's anything from this episode that you want someone to, take away and to keep with them, what would that be?
It's possible. I think the messaging in medicine right now is very negative. Like, private practice is dead. If you're not working for a hospital or a group, you're not going to make any money. You're not going to have that doctor lifestyle, or you're going to just be working yourself to the bone. I think the message is one of hope and positivity, and just knowing that it is possible and that there are physicians, a lot of them, who are doing amazing in this space, and that medicine is still thriving if you let it.
And so if there's anything that you take away from this podcast episode, is that it is possible and that you can do it. And there are an amazing amount of living examples of people who are doing this. Dr. Carolina Sueldo is one of them. So Dr. Sueldo, thank you so much for coming on. This has been amazing. I've learned so much. And I believe that I'll be taking, a lot away from this podcast episode. So I just want to say a really big thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for saying that. I'm so happy that it was helpful to you.
And so to everyone who is watching, remember not to allow this episode to be your best kept secret. So if there's something that you learned that you believe will benefit another doctor, then I do want to invite you to share this with them. And I believe that it'll make an impact in their life. And so a very big thank you to you for watching, and we will see you next time.